Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
National Folk Festival in Salisbury is upon us, and one feature not talked about a lot is food. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. There will be food of all kinds at the National Folk Festival during the September event. For the Eastern Shore cuisine, there will be traditional crab cakes, oysters, and of course the Smith Island cake, Maryland's state dessert. With us in the studio this morning is Laura Bottinelli. She's the current executive director of the Ward Museum of Wildfowl Art, and Terry Conway, the executive chairman of Handy Seafood Incorporated. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So let me start with you, Laura. So what kind of things do you think we're going to be seeing out there, particularly in terms of the Eastern Shore?
So when you arrive at the Maryland Traditions Folklife area, you're going to encounter large things that you recognize, like stacks of crab pots and combines and hay balers and a Smith Island skiff being constructed. But then you're going to start to smell things too, because we have an extensive foodways area that's part of the Chesapeake Traditions Zone. There are going to be people exhibiting and demonstrating crab picking, crab shucking, as we'll hear from Terry, soft shell shedding. The foodways stage itself is going to have cooks from across the Delmarva community in the Chesapeake Bay region cooking Eastern Shore fare. Everything from Smith Island cake to muskrat to crabs and oysters. So when you get to the Maryland Traditions Folklife area, you should feel as though you're in the Chesapeake. We're going to be right there on the Wacomico River, right actually next to Market Street Inn. And the idea is that we've been able to gather tradition bearers from across the region to be able to showcase to all these visitors that are coming from outside of the Chesapeake to be able to discover the rich heritage that we have here.
So we've got Terry here. He's with the Handy Seafood Incorporated. And I understand that crabs are going to be your specialty out there. So tell me a little bit about what are we going to be seeing out there?
Well, we will have a crab shedding facility, as it's done on the Chesapeake Bay. Although we're bringing it to land, and we have to bring in water. We have to bring in crabs. We have to bring in special filters because we're land-based as opposed to circulating water in and out of the Chesapeake Bay. And we will have crabs in there that are getting ready to molt, come out of their shell. They are very soft for about 4 hours. If they stay in the water, they gradually harden up. This is was started in Crisfield over 100 years ago. Handy's been processing soft crabs and exporting them all over the world since for 101 years now. They are a seafood delicacy. Only found that originally started in Crisfield, and now there are other operations throughout the world. But we export them to over 40 different countries. They are was started right in Crisfield, of all places. So we'll be demonstrating how the crabs come out of their shell. As I say, they're soft for about 4 hours, and they gradually harden up. They take in calcium from the water. And we ship them after they molt. We ship them by air all over the country. We chill dress some of them for supermarkets. You find them behind the glass. And we also freeze them. In some cases we bread them, value add them for retailers such as Wegmans. So it's an extensive operation.
So what is the secret to getting a good soft shell crab there? Aside from sticking the pot out there, I guess, because I know they have to go out there.
Well, they're caught as hard crabs, and the waterman can look at the little paddle fin on the back and determine whether it's going to molt in 5 days, 3 days, 1 day, or within the hour. And they put them in separate shedding tanks that are open-ended with circulating water in and out of the Chesapeake Bay. And the watermen have to come down about every 6 hours to get them out of the water, or they will turn hard. And after 12 hours, they're as hard as this table. So it's a family operation. Usually The waterman is out on the boat, and the kids and the aunts and uncles and so forth are in the shanties, as they call them, pulling the crabs out of the water at the right time so that the texture is just right.
So what is the difference in, I mean, soft shell and hard shell crabs? I mean, in terms of what people are hearing here.
Well, it's the same crab.
Right, the same crab, right.
But every crustacean, it's to grow, it's got to come out of its shell, and so it eats and eats and eats, and then it's timed to come out of its shell. It has to get out of the shell, takes on more water, kind of expands itself, and then starts to grow a new shell. It's like when you were a child, your feet kept growing. You had to get out of your shoes and
Right.
get a new pair. The same way with a crustacean.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very interesting to watch these animals mold, come out of their shell.
Can you really see them? I mean, it actually.
You'll see them at the exhibit.
Uh-huh.
We will have them there. And some will be coming out of the shell. Some will be part way out. Some will be 2/3 of the way out. Some will be all the way out. And you'll see this kind of magical process of nature.
Yeah, this is, of course, obviously a great tradition, as you mentioned a moment ago, on the Eastern Shore. But as we've seen over the years, the number of crabs that they've been able to catch have certainly gone down in years. How difficult is it to get these crabs? What kind of supply are we looking at now? I mean, is it because I know we've had, for instance, the impact of some of the diseases and things like that as well. I mean, what's going on?
Well, the catch for soft crabs or peeler crabs, they're called peeler crabs before they molt, is down. It's probably down to 3/4 of what it used to be. It's significantly lower. So the supply is getting more and more scarce all the time from the Chesapeake Bay. It was due to a number of things. The watermen not being able to pass this skill on to their next generation. It's expensive to get into with a boat and pots and shanties and so forth. It takes a lot of money to do that. So the number of watermen has decreased. The regulations about preserving the crab in the Chesapeake Bay have had an influence. And the predators for a soft crab are basically fish. So as a crab molts, it's got to hide someplace, hide in the grass, keep away from the eels and the fish. So with the decline of the grass in the Chesapeake Bay, there's not as many places to hide. And of course, they're very good food for fish. They can gobble them up when they're inch long or half an inch long, so forth. So fish, number of watermen available to do this kind of work economically. A few regulations thrown in there to preserve crabs has all caused the decline of the soft crabs.
There's also, and I understand, certain regulations in terms of the size of the crab. So when you go out and you find them in the pot, what's the story with that?
Well, the size is the regulations on the size have been in effect for at least 50 years. They have not changed. The regulations have to do with the days of the week that crabbers can go out. They used to be able to go out 7 days a week. Now it's down to 4. It's just there's all kinds of little nuances that affect a waterman's ability to catch these wonderful seafood delicacies. But
Right.
so what's happened? What's happened is that in other parts of the world, people have learned to mold crabs as well, mainly along the equator in Southeast Asia. So there are crab molting facilities overseas now, and the crabs that molt overseas have almost an identical taste to the ones coming out of the Chesapeake Bay. So the supply, although low in the Chesapeake Bay, worldwide has continued to expand.
Is there a difference in taste, you think?
Well,
Or are you just biased?
We have fooled a lot of people. We put Chesapeake Bay and an imported soft crab on the save, and some people just swear they're the same. But it takes a really refined taste to get the difference.
And what do you think defines, in terms of taste?
Yeah.
What do you think defines the Chesapeake crab?
Well, it is a sweet seafood. It's a very delicate taste. It is for the people who like soft crabs. They're very emotional about it. They really like them. Other people can't quite figure it out. If didn't grow up by the sea or didn't have them when you were a youngster, they can't quite get it. But it's a very refined, delicate taste. You cannot add a lot of spices to a soft crab because then you can't taste the sweet, delicate morsel that these soft crabs have.
So we've seen a decline, obviously, in the number of watermen that we have these days. Some of them are aging out. Is that a problem? Do you see? Some suggested an entire sort of culture, as it were, seems to be disappearing before our eyes. Do you think that's true?
Well, it's definitely on the decline.
Yeah.
We probably 30 years ago we probably we're buying crabs from maybe 50 different watermen, and now we're down to maybe 15, something like that.
Well, how does that affect into your supply? I
Well,
mean,
does it make it? Supply goes with it.
Yeah. Does it make it more expensive?
In some cases, yes, a little bit more expensive, but not a big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're sad to see this happen, but it's just a combination of a lot of things. The grasses in the Chesapeake Bay, the amount they can catch, the economics of buying a boat and pots and working it every day, and having a family to support the shanty operation, just other ways to survive in this world besides just crab potting.
Right, right. I mean, at one point, particularly in, I guess, the late 1800s, early 20th century, both crabs and oystering, for that, were almost at their peak, I guess, at one point.
Well, I wasn't around then, but certainly oysters were at that time, around the turn of the century. All of Crisfield has a lot of oyster shells buried between the grass, the surface there. So
right. It's with the had a number of plants and so on and so forth that dealt with this stuff, and that's all sort of gone.
Well, it's more or less gone. We're still in the oyster business some.
Right.
It's not as big as it used to be, but Chesapeake Bay oysters are quite prized. They're very good, and we buy them every day, and process them and get them ready to market. Send them as far away as Nevada, California. They're wonderful, but supply is not enormous.
Right.
Like it used to be.
You get a lot of competition, I assume, from overseas in terms of oysters?
Or
what is that?
Not as much. You'd
as
be
much?
surprised. The oysters overseas are a bit on the sour, muddy, and not so good.
Mm-hmm.
Chesapeake Bay oysters are really good. But the ones overseas are,
So.
Yeah.
Right. Spoken like a true Eastern Shore guy, right?
Well, it's a true. You have to grow up loving your own oyster, all right? And if you like muddy, sour oysters when you're young, that's your oyster, and everything else is not your oyster. So.
Right. Do you think oysters are coming back?
Yes, they're certainly in demand, and the Chesapeake Bay oysters are coming back a little bit at a time. That's okay.
So they're making progress.
Yes, we're definitely making progress.
But I suspect they'll never hit the highs, obviously, that they had before.
I would not expect so.
15 million, something like that, bushels, something like that, I think. Yes.
Well,
it was incredible, I think, back then.
Yeah, the railroad used to come right downtown Crisfield just to pick up all the oysters, Railway Express, and then take them up to Philadelphia and New York. But no need for a railroad anymore.
I guess not. Among other things, I would turn to Laura here. So that is obviously those are two of the delicacies that we have on the shore. And the other one, and I must admit I've not tried this. It's muskrat. Have you tried muskrat?
I have.
So
As a vegetarian, even.
Oh, even as a vegetarian, you had to do it, just right.
That's right.
So tell me a little bit about that. Obviously, it'll be featured in part, and what does it taste like?
Okay. Well, I think I should first. The person who will be bringing us the muskratting tradition is Rhonda Aaron, who's from Church Creek, Maryland. And just to segue into some things that Terry was saying, she's exhibiting at the event eel pot weaving. So as a tradition bearer from Dorchester County, just the connection with the marsh, Terry spent a lot of time talking about the things under the water, right? And down there are the eels and the eelgrass and all that. So she'll be showing the technique of building an eel pot. But her family's a trapping family of muskrats, turtle, eels, and anything else that can be pulled out of the marsh. So the National Outdoor Show, which is held in Dorchester County every February, is really a place where all of those community traditions are exhibited. They have a muskrat skinning competition, a muskrat cooking competition. So Rhonda has sort of like risen in the community as like a leader through her stewardship of that event, and then her just skills in this type of work. So, I'm not the best person to talk about eating a lot of muskrat because I've only eaten it a few times, but I've seen it prepared many a time. And there's different community styles. Like there's a Dorchester style, which I understand is more of like an oven baked sort of almost whole type of cooking, but then it's prepared as a meat into all different types of things like stews and chilies and tacos. So think of it just as a protein, and people are able to incorporate it into contemporary fare, but then also prepare it in very traditional ways. So yeah, it's a lot like a crab. Look at Terry's face.
Oh, you said no.
It's living in the same. It's living in the same zone.
I object.
You object. All right. But Rhonda's traditions connect very, very, very fully back to the sort of Eastern Shore heritage and people making a life and a living and building their families out of the things that can be pulled out of the bay, and that's the story of much of what Terry had shared. She's just pulling different animals out of the bay.
And what does it taste like? Don't tell me tastes like chicken. I don't.
No, I mean it's a dark meat, so
Yeah.
I mean it's usually heavily seasoned, so that way some of the gaminess would be complemented by the different herbs and seasons that are added.
And these are trapped, not like grown as like you would cows or something. And these are
Right.
in the
Well,
wild,
the ones
right?
that are there's a trapping culture. Just like any industry, there are other types of ways. That's not happening here
Right.
on Delmarva, but there are some places that you can get muskrat supply year round as more of a commercial operation.
Right. And I mean, and the muskrat, I mean, this is not something that the Europeans came over and said, well, this is what we want to do. It's just what they found and what they subsisted on.
Yeah, and then their hides themselves were a big part of the economy of the shore because the skinned, there was the meat and then there was the skin, and the skins were sold and used as a way to earn money and establish cultures.
Culture, right. The other thing, we also, I guess, have scrapple, which is not unique, I guess, to the Eastern Shore. But
Yeah,
we're going
people
to have
butcher
somebody.
hogs all over the world, don't they?
You can find it anywhere, apparently. So tell me a little bit about that, particularly as it relates to the shore here.
Well, so Newell Quinton, who's from Sharptown, is going to be coming. San Domingo is his home community, and exhibiting and demonstrating what has been passed to him generationally from the seasonal hog processing to be able to make hams and then to make scrapple and sausages. So we will only be seeing the second phase of the process after the hog had been butchered. That would happen elsewhere, so don't worry. But when he's on the stage, he'll be going through the way in which the scrapple is cooked and seasoned and then ultimately prepared for family supper. It's an important part of sort of Delmarva traditions. There's scrapple making factories here on the shore, but in the sort of home-based kitchens, scrapple is a way to connect many generations together because it was a staple. You needed to eat everything. You need to eat what was available, and when you butcher a hog, there's a lot of food available.
Right. And the other thing we want to talk about, of course, is Smith Island cake.
That's an easy segue.
For all of us, I think.
Yeah.
And we should have said it's Maryland State dessert here.
Yeah.
So how did this finely layered cake come about?
Well, there's different stories.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a densely, it's stacks of thinly baked layered cake, with icing in between, and it's a very sturdy cake for travel because of just it doesn't crumble. It can be wrapped and brought into many watermen's work pails, as I understood the way the cake sort of found its way into the regular daily life of Smith Islanders. And it was, I guess, in the 80s, there was a researcher that went out and started talking to people about their cake. And the question, as told me by Janice Marshall, the question said, well, what's that? And she said, it's cake. She goes, no, what's that? It's cake. And it wasn't cake. It was this beautifully stacked layered cake, which was a signature way that the island women would be able to prepare their community feasts. There was cake walks. There was all types of tradition that went with this cake. But in the community, it was just cake. And that happens a lot with these traditions, which have been passed generationally. And are able to then, when you look at them in a different context, you see how special they are. You see how they are delicacies. And, going back to how this relates to the crabbing culture is, Smith Island is a waterman's community, being isolated out in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay. So these layers and generational passing of knowledge created these distinct ways of doing things, whether it's, shedding crabs down in Chrisfield, or the way to identify when the different crab harvest was going on. And in kitchens of Smith Island, the Smith Island cake, and it being recognized as the Maryland State dessert, I think is a beautiful accomplishment, and it is delicious. And so we'll have two different Islanders presenting Smith Island cake, Janice Marshall and Marietta Marshall. So there'll be a demonstration of how the cake is prepared on 2 different days.
But do we know how it became named the Smith Island cake? I mean, Smith Island is obviously a real. Or any rumors?
I like that it's Smith Island cake and it didn't get called something else. I think that's appropriate. It's not Chesapeake Bay cake. It is Smith Island cake. Now, you didn't ask me how that tastes.
Oh, yeah. And how does that taste?
It's wonderful.
Well, actually, it has all kinds of tastes.
Yes.
Because they come in all kinds of...
Right. I believe we will be showcasing traditional Smith Island cake, which is a yellow cake with a chocolate icing.
Okay.
And there are, of course, many different varieties and ways that people can change up the cake and the icing. But your traditional Smith Island cake would be yellow cake with chocolate icing, and it tastes great.
So, Terry, people come and they watch your crabs and I assume get a little taste of them at some point. What do you hope people come away from from their experience?
Well, what I would like to have them see these wonderful animals molting, coming out of their shell in their soft state. But we do not cook. We cannot cook at the exhibit. So they could find them some other place,
right?
I guess. But I think just an interest in soft crabs, and we have some literature there, and so forth. They can buy the product at our online store if they want to. We're going to be passing out little coupons, so they can get $10 off on a $50 purchase. So we would hope some people would see the soft crabs and hear a little about them and understand they've been around for 100 years and understand they're a worldwide cuisine now, coming out of little old Chrisfield, that they would get online and order some good soft crabs or crab cakes or some of the crab appetizers we have, and that's just expose them, I guess.
And Laura, what do you hope people will take away from these kinds of exhibits that particularly relate to the Eastern Shore?
It's a great question. Well, the exposure is important, and I think there's the general appreciation for what is distinct and culturally significant in the Chesapeake. The work cultures that came out of the Bay and the food and the other types of, I consider what Terry does art. I consider what a decoy carver does art. I consider what Newell Quinton does when he's preparing his scrapple as art. And so to be able to appreciate, enjoy, and recognize the beauty of the work that people in this area do and how much it's shaped the culture of our region. You know, the Chesapeake Bay is known worldwide as a signature area that's deep with tradition, and that's what we're trying to showcase, is that these traditions are alive, that people still practice them, they're appreciated, and they're approachable. And if you want to learn more about it, we're hoping to give people ways to discover them by going into the other communities of the Chesapeake and Delmarva to eat at restaurants and get on boats and discover the marsh.
Right, right. And now we of course mentioned in an earlier program that you're leaving. What impresses you the most about the region? You've been here, what, about 16 years, something like that, I think you said.
What impresses me most about the region? It's always been the people. I mean, there's no question. I mean, the ability. You know, Terry and I basically got introduced like a couple weeks ago, and to hear him talk, it echoes things that I've been hearing for over a decade about the way in which, you know, something as simple as a crab can build community, it can build culture, it can create livelihood, and to be able to bring our area worldwide recognition. And it's the people who are committed to those traditions that make that possible. So that's what carries with me the most is the commitment of the folks from the Chesapeake to carry those traditions forward.
And you, any particular tradition that, to say, you weren't aware of?
Oh.
I mean, I'm sure there are plenty, but I mean, because I say this as somebody who, you know, didn't come from. I mean, I came from California, so what do we know, right?
Let's see, what's in and out. That's a great question. I was going back to what we spoke about with eel pot weaving. I understood how eels were part of the culture, but then the actual ways in which they're trapped, and you would see an eel basket before, and I didn't know what that was. And so come to the National Folk Festival, and you'll get to see what an eel pot is, and you'll be able to recognize it if you ever see one in an antique store.
Right, right. Well, we were speaking with Laura Bottinelli. She's the current executive director of the Ward Museum of Wildfowl Art. Also, Terry Conway. He's executive chairman of Handy Seafood Incorporated, and we appreciate you both stopping by and chatting with us this morning.
Thank you.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Rank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on Pack 14.